The poor girl signed a marriage deal with a millionaire until she discovered the one clause he tried to hide. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Samantha Carter had always dreamed of a life that was different from the one she knew. Growing up in a small, run-down town in Georgia, she had never imagined that one day her life would be forever changed by a man with more money than she could ever comprehend. She worked tirelessly as a waitress at a local diner, scraping by just to pay her bills. Life was a constant struggle, but Samantha held on to the hope that someday, somehow, things would get better. Then came the day she met Alexander Weston. He was everything Samantha had never expected. Tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, Alexander looked like someone who had just stepped out of a movie. He was well-dressed, carrying himself with the air of someone who belonged in a world that was entirely foreign to her. Their meeting was unremarkable at first. It was at a charity event for a local cause, something Samantha had attended on a whim, thinking it might be a chance to network or simply escape her mundane routine. But when Alexander walked into the room, everything seemed to shift. His presence commanded attention. As their eyes met across the crowded room, Samantha felt an inexplicable pull. He smiled, and it felt as if time slowed down for a brief moment. Alexander approached her, his charm undeniable, and they struck up a conversation. At first, Samantha had no idea who he was, but his ease, confidence, and genuine interest in her soon put her at ease. They spoke about life, ambitions, and dreams, and before she knew it, Alexander had invited her to dinner. It seemed innocent enough, just a meal between two people getting to know each other. But that dinner was the beginning of something Samantha could never have predicted. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became more frequent, and Samantha found herself drawn to him. He was generous, kind, and attentive, and slowly, the idea of being with someone like him began to seem not so far-fetched. But it wasn't long before Alexander proposed something that would change everything. He suggested they enter into a marriage contract, a deal that would bring them both benefits. In return for her companionship and the public appearance of a happy couple, Samantha would receive a lavish lifestyle, financial security, and a life she had only ever dreamed of. The terms seemed simple enough, and despite her initial hesitation, Samantha couldn't deny the allure of the opportunity. She agreed, believing that this was the break she had been waiting for her entire life. Little did she know, this decision would lead her into a world of secrets, deception, and a clause that Alexander had tried so hard to keep hidden. As the weeks passed, Samantha quickly adapted to her new life. The luxury, the attention, the feeling of being someone important, things she had only ever seen in magazines or on TV. Alexander's world was vast and filled with all the material comforts one could imagine. Private jets, exclusive dinners, and designer clothes. Everything was at her disposal. Samantha had never known anything like it. At first, it was thrilling. She felt as though she had finally found a place where she belonged, a place far removed from her humble beginnings. But despite all the grandeur, there was something unsettling about Alexander. He was always polite, always charming, but there was an air of coldness around him. They spent their days together, attending social events, dining at fancy restaurants, and vacationing at exotic locations. But there was never any real connection. No deep conversations, no emotional intimacy. Samantha began to wonder if this was what true love looked like. Maybe this was just how wealthy people lived. Maybe this was what she had agreed to when she signed the contract. Still, the more time she spent with him, the more she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The contract they had signed had been straightforward, but there was one part of it that still made her uneasy. It was a clause that Alexander had insisted on, something that didn't sit well with her even when they first discussed it. The clause stated that Samantha was required to remain in the public eye as his wife for at least 5 years. It wasn't just about appearances. There was something more to it. Samantha had tried to ignore it, to focus on the perks and the glamorous lifestyle, but the unease grew with each passing day. She had thought the clause was just a formality. After all, what did it matter if they were publicly seen as a married couple? But the longer she stayed in the arrangement, the more it felt like there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Then, one evening, the weight of her suspicions became too much to bear. Samantha was going through some of the papers that Alexander had left behind in his study when she found something that made her heart skip a beat. It was an addendum to their original agreement, an additional clause that had not been mentioned before. This new clause was written in a much smaller font, almost as if it were intentionally hidden. Her eyes scanned the document as she read the words that would change everything. The clause stated that, in the event of their separation, Samantha would forfeit everything. Every asset, every dollar, and every bit of security she had gained. All the money, the lifestyle, the privileges, gone, without a single penny to her name. It was a safety net for Alexander, but a trap for her. Samantha felt the blood drain from her face as the realization sank in. She had been deceived, manipulated into thinking she was entering a partnership, when, in fact, she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she hadn't fully understood. This clause was designed to keep her dependent on him, to ensure that she could never truly leave him without losing everything. The thoughts raced through her mind. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen this coming? Alexander had promised her a new life, but this contract was nothing more than a gilded cage. And now, she was trapped. The days that followed felt like a blur to Samantha. She couldn't shake the image of the clause from her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those words, mocking her. It was as if everything she had believed about the life she was building with Alexander had been a lie. The extravagant dinners, the luxury vacations, the perfect image they had presented to the world, none of it mattered anymore. What she thought was a dream had quickly become a nightmare. For the first time since entering this arrangement, Samantha felt like she was losing control. The promise of security, wealth, and a beautiful life had been alluring, but the truth was now clear. She was no more than a prisoner in a gilded cage. She spent the next few days trying to make sense of what she had discovered. How had she not seen it sooner? Why had she trusted Alexander so completely? Every moment they had shared, every smile, every kind word, was it all part of a plan to trap her? As much as she tried to justify it, Samantha couldn't deny the truth anymore. Alexander had known exactly what he was doing. He had manipulated her into this marriage, using her dreams of a better life to his advantage. The clause in the contract wasn't just about money. It was about control. He had set up a system where she could never leave without losing everything. Samantha was overwhelmed with emotion. Anger, betrayal, confusion, all of it mixed together in a storm of thoughts and feelings. She knew she had to confront Alexander, but she also knew it wouldn't be easy. He was always so calm, so composed, and she had no idea how he would react to her discovery. It was possible he would deny everything, smooth it over with his charm, and try to convince her that she had misunderstood. But deep down, Samantha knew better. She had to face him. She couldn't continue living a life built on lies, not when the truth had finally come to light. The night she decided to confront him, Samantha found herself standing in front of Alexander's grand office, her heart racing in her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. When she pushed the door open, Alexander was sitting at his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when he heard her enter, his usual cool demeanor in place. "Samantha," he said smoothly, as if everything were normal. "What's on your mind?" His voice didn't betray a hint of tension, but Samantha could feel the weight of the moment. "We need to talk," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "About the contract. About the clause." Alexander's eyes flickered for just a second, but then he put the glass down and leaned back in his chair, as if he were preparing for a conversation he had been expecting. "I see," he said calmly. "So, you've read the addendum." His nonchalance only fueled the fire building inside her. Samantha's hands clenched into fists as she took a step forward. "You didn't tell me about it," she said, her voice rising slightly. You lied to me, Alexander. He didn't seem surprised. In fact, he almost looked amused. Samantha, he said slowly, you knew what you were getting into. I made it clear from the beginning that this was a business arrangement. A contract. You didn't seem to have a problem with it then. The words cut through her like ice. She had been so naive. You knew I would never agree if I knew the truth, she replied, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. You used me. Alexander didn't flinch. I used the situation to my advantage, he said, his tone cool and calculating. I'm sorry if you feel betrayed, but we both knew the terms when you signed. You knew the stakes. You're here because you wanted this life. You wanted the security. Samantha stood there, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had wanted the security, yes, but she hadn't signed up for this, being a pawn in someone else's game. The reality of her situation hit her harder than she expected. Alexander's words made it clear that, to him, this was all just a transaction. And in this game, she was nothing more than a player who had underestimated the rules. The silence in the room was suffocating. Samantha could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat louder than the last. Alexander was still seated, watching her with that same detached expression on his face, as if he were observing a situation he could control at any moment. You knew what you were signing up for, he repeated, his tone cold, like a business transaction. This was never about love, Samantha. It was always about security. I gave you that. And now, you're acting like I've wronged you. His words stung. It wasn't just what he said, it was the fact that he truly believed it. He had manipulated her, and somehow, in his mind, it was justified. Security? Samantha's voice shook, barely able to form the words. You call this security? A contract where I'm trapped, unable to leave without losing everything? That's not security, Alexander. That's a prison. Alexander leaned forward, his gaze steady. It's not a prison if you don't want to leave, he said simply. You have everything you've ever wanted. You're living a life most people can only dream of. I've kept my end of the bargain. I don't see the problem. Samantha felt a rush of emotions rise within her. Anger, betrayal, confusion, but most of all, a deep, aching sadness. She had allowed herself to believe in the lie, in the dream he had sold her. For what? To live in a mansion, to wear designer clothes, to be treated like a trophy? Was that what her worth had become? She had always wanted to escape her past, her small-town life. But now, she wasn't sure if the life she had been given was worth the price she had paid. She thought she was getting a fairy tale, but what she had found instead was a story written by someone else. One where she was not the heroine, but the pawn. I'm not a fool, Alexander, she said, her voice quiet now but firm. You can't control me like this. I won't let you. He smiled, a thin, almost imperceptible smile, as if she had just said something amusing. You think you have a choice? He asked, almost mockingly. You think you can walk away and start over? You signed a contract, Samantha. You agreed to everything. This life, everything you have now, it's all because of me. Don't forget that. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. It was true. Everything she had now, everything she had come to believe was hers, was tied to him, to the contract, to his rules. She wasn't free. She never had been. The realization felt like a weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. I'm not your possession, she said, the words coming out more forcefully than she had intended. I won't stay in this cage any longer, Alexander. I'll find a way out, even if it means walking away with nothing. Alexander's smile faded. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he seemed less sure of himself. You can't just walk away, he said, his voice losing its smooth, confident tone. You'll have nothing. I'll make sure of that. Samantha stood tall, her resolve hardening. Then I'll have nothing, but I'll have my freedom. As she turned to leave, Alexander didn't stop her. He didn't say a word. Samantha walked out of the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel trapped. She didn't feel like she was living in a cage. She was scared, yes, but she was also free. Free to choose her own path. Free to fight for the life she truly wanted, even if it meant losing everything she had come to depend on. And for the first time in a long while, Samantha was no longer afraid of what might come next. The days following Samantha's confrontation with Alexander were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She had made the decision to walk away, but she knew the road ahead would not be easy. The lavish life she had once admired now felt like an illusion, a cage that she had willingly stepped into. She couldn't help but wonder how she had gotten so caught up in it all. The thought of losing everything, of starting over with nothing, was daunting. But it wasn't nearly as terrifying as the idea of staying trapped in a life that wasn't truly hers. Samantha spent the next few days in her own head, trying to figure out what her next step should be. She knew she had to leave the mansion, but where would she go? How would she survive without the wealth and connections Alexander had given her? For the first time in a long while, she felt utterly alone. But as time passed, her resolve only grew stronger. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back. She wasn't going to let Alexander control her life any longer. One afternoon, while sitting in the small, sterile room that had once felt like her sanctuary, Samantha made a call. It was a difficult decision, but she knew it was the right one. She called her sister, Emma, the only family she had left. Emma had always been there for her, even when Samantha had chosen to leave home and pursue a life in the city. Emma had never understood why Samantha had become involved with someone like Alexander, but she had always supported her, no matter what. When Samantha explained the situation, Emma was silent. For a long moment, processing what she was hearing. Finally, she spoke. "You can come back home, Sam," Emma said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not alone. You don't need him. You never did." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes as she heard the words she so desperately needed to hear. Emma's unconditional support made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could get through this. The thought of returning to her small hometown, where things were simpler and more familiar, brought a sense of comfort. But it also reminded her of how far she had come from that life. Could she really go back? Could she walk away from the person she had become and the life she had built? The questions lingered, but deep down, Samantha knew that her only way forward was to let go of the past. The next day, Samantha packed her bags, leaving behind the life she had grown so accustomed to. As she left the mansion for the last time, she felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the things Alexander had given her, the material possessions, the lifestyle, but she realized now that they had never been the things that truly mattered. What mattered was her freedom. What mattered was the ability to choose her own path. The journey back to her hometown wasn't easy. It was a long drive, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But each mile brought her closer to a life where she could be in control, where she could rebuild her sense of self. And with each passing hour, Samantha felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she was making the right decision. She was choosing her freedom. When she finally arrived at Emma's house, it felt like a homecoming. Emma was there, waiting for her, and the two sisters embraced tightly. For the first time in a long time, Samantha didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt lighter, freer, ready to take on whatever came next. It wasn't going to be easy, but Samantha knew one thing for sure. She was no longer trapped in a life that wasn't hers. She had taken control of her own destiny, and that was the most empowering feeling of all. In the weeks that followed, Samantha began to adjust to her new life. It wasn't the lavish, fast-paced existence she had grown accustomed to, but it was real, and it was hers. She had left behind the mansion, the designer clothes, the sparkling events, and most importantly, the control Alexander had once held over her. Her sister Emma was her rock, offering her a place to stay and helping her through the difficult transition. It wasn't easy at first. Samantha had always been proud, and asking for help felt like an admission of failure. But Emma never made her feel that way. The small town that Samantha had once considered limiting now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could start over. She took a job at a local cafe, working with the same people she had known growing up. It was a humbling experience, but also gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The steady rhythm of work, The familiar faces and the quiet of the countryside were grounding her in ways she hadn't expected. One day, while serving coffee to a regular customer, Samantha's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name attached to the message, Alexander Weston. She hadn't heard from him since the night she left. It felt like a lifetime ago. Hesitantly, she opened the message. "We need to talk," it read. "I know you're angry, but I never meant for things to end like this. Please, let's discuss this. We can work something out." Her hand trembled as she put the phone down on the counter. The message stirred up all the feelings she had pushed aside: anger, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. She thought she was done with him, that she had moved on. But now his words were bringing it all back. Samantha wasn't sure what to feel. She knew she had made the right decision in walking away, but a part of her still wondered about the life she had left behind. Was she making the right choice? Could she have handled things differently? After a few moments of contemplation, Samantha realized that going back to Alexander, even for a conversation, would undo everything she had worked so hard to build. She had made a promise to herself, a promise to never let anyone control her again. She wasn't going to let Alexander slip back into her life, no matter how persuasive his words were. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone again and quickly typed a response. "I don't need to talk," she wrote. "I've made my decision, and nothing you say will change it. Please leave me alone." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. As she stared at the screen, her heart raced, but she felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was done. She had set her boundaries, and she wasn't going to let anyone cross them again. The next few days passed without incident. Alexander didn't reply, and Samantha went about her life, focusing on her work and her own healing. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was beginning to realize that she was strong enough to face it on her own. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she had made the right choice. But she knew that the only way forward was to trust herself. She was no longer the woman who had signed away her freedom for the illusion of security. She was someone new, someone who had taken back her life and was now writing her own story. And for the first time in a long time, Samantha felt truly free. Months passed, and Samantha found herself growing stronger with each day. The pain of her past life, the betrayal, the fear, those feelings began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and independence she had never known. She had started to rebuild herself, brick by brick. Her job at the cafe was no longer just a way to survive. It had become a symbol of her new beginning. Samantha had learned that the simplest things in life, working hard, making her own decisions, and living on her terms, were the things that truly mattered. One Saturday afternoon, while she was working, a familiar face walked into the cafe. Samantha's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. Lucas, an old friend from high school. They had lost touch after she left the small town, chasing her dreams of a more glamorous life. Lucas had always been kind to her, a steady presence in her life back then. He was no longer the shy, quiet boy she remembered. He had grown into a confident man, with a warm smile and eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Samantha," he asked, his voice filled with surprise as he approached the counter. She looked up, not sure how to react. The years apart had changed both of them. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lucas smiled, his expression warm. "I heard you were back in town. Figured I'd stop by and say hi." Samantha felt a mixture of emotions. It had been so long since she had seen someone from her past. And yet, here he was, someone who knew her before everything had changed. "How have you been?" he asked, settling into a seat at the counter. "I've been good," Samantha replied, giving him a smile. "Really good, actually." It was true. She was starting to feel like herself again. "I heard you left for bigger things," Lucas said, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Samantha hesitated for a moment, but then decided to tell him the truth, to let someone in. "I did," she said, looking down at the coffee cup she was cleaning. "But it wasn't what I thought it would be. I made some choices that, well, let's just say they didn't turn out the way I hoped." Lucas nodded, as if understanding without needing the details. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said gently. Samantha met his gaze, feeling a connection she hadn't felt in years. "But I'm okay now," she continued, her voice steady. "I'm starting over. I'm learning to be okay with where I am, with who I am." Lucas smiled again, this time more softly. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, Samantha." She felt a warmth spread through her at his words. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that to her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hope. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. As the conversation continued, Samantha realized that while her past was filled with mistakes, it didn't define her. She had made a choice to leave behind a life that wasn't right for her, and now she was reclaiming her story. She wasn't alone anymore. There were people who cared about her, people who believed in her, and that gave her strength. By the time Lucas left the cafe, Samantha felt lighter than she had in months. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward with the confidence that no matter what, she could face whatever came her way. As the door closed behind him, she stood there for a moment, a smile tugging at her lips. It was the first time in a long while that she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the months went by, Samantha's life in the small town continued to evolve. The quiet routine she had once feared had begun to feel more like a blessing. The simplicity of her days allowed her to focus on things she had long neglected, like herself. She was learning to trust in her own strength, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from anything. It felt liberating, like she was finally breathing again after being suffocated for so long. Work at the cafe was steady, and though the pay wasn't luxurious, it was enough. She had learned to appreciate the small victories, like being able to pay her bills on time and having her evenings free to read, walk through the town, or meet with friends. One evening, as she was closing up the cafe, Samantha received a phone call. She had been expecting it for days, but still felt a knot form in her stomach when she saw the name on the screen, Alexander. For a moment, she almost didn't pick up. She had told herself she was done with him, that there was nothing left to discuss. But she had been avoiding it for so long that she felt a strange pull to finally hear him out. With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Samantha, it's Alexander." His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I know this is unexpected, but I think we need to talk." Samantha hesitated, but the curiosity in his voice made her feel like she had to listen. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady. "About everything," he replied. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I made some mistakes. I know I hurt you, and for that, I'm sorry. I'm not asking for anything from you, but I think it's time we talk face to face." Samantha's heart was racing. She hadn't expected an apology, let alone the calm sincerity in his tone. For a moment, she considered refusing. She had worked so hard to move past him, to leave that life behind. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't the same person who had walked away in fear months ago. She had grown. She had found her voice. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to face the past once and for all. "All right," Samantha said after a beat. "We can meet. But this is the last time." She could hear the relief in his voice. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be at the cafe tomorrow at noon. I'll respect your boundaries, I promise." The conversation ended, and Samantha stood still for a moment, processing what had just happened. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but she knew one thing. It was not about going back to him. It wasn't about rekindling anything. It was about closure, about being able to look him in the eye and say everything she had held inside for so long. The next day, when Alexander walked into the cafe, Samantha felt a rush of emotions. He looked the same, impeccably dressed, exuding the same confidence that had once drawn her in. But as their eyes met, she saw something different in him. Vulnerability, maybe even regret. He took a seat across from her at the table, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice quiet. "But I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. For using you, for manipulating you. I've been a fool." Samantha listened, her heart conflicted. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him. Not yet. But hearing him admit his mistakes, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, made her realize something. She didn't need his apology to move on. She had already moved on. "I appreciate the apology, Alexander," she said, her voice calm. "But I've learned that I don't need anyone's approval to be happy. I don't need you or your money. I've learned to stand on my own, and that's enough for me." There was a long pause. Alexander didn't say anything at first, as if weighing her words. When he spoke again, it was softer, quieter. "I understand," he said. "I'm glad you found your way. I always thought you needed me, but it turns out you were stronger than I gave you credit for." Samantha nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had faced him, and she had shown him the person she had become. She didn't need anything from him anymore, and that was the most empowering feeling of all. "Goodbye, Alexander," she said, standing up from the table. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She walked away from him with her head held high, knowing that her past no longer had a hold on her. The past was done. The future was hers to create. The weeks that followed Samantha's conversation with Alexander were filled with a quiet sense of peace. It was as if, in that final moment, she had finally closed the door on a chapter of her life that had once held so much power over her. The weight she had carried for months, perhaps even years, had lifted. She woke up each day with a renewed sense of purpose, her heart no longer burdened by the fear of what could have been or the doubts that used to haunt her. She was free, truly free. Her routine at the cafe had become a comforting rhythm. She had earned the respect of her coworkers and the trust of the customers. People had come to know her not as the woman who had once been swept into a world of luxury and lies, but as someone who had fought for herself and found her own strength. It was a small, simple life, but it was hers. She could feel herself growing into the person she had always wanted to be. And then, just when she thought things were settling into place, a letter arrived. It wasn't anything she had been expecting. The envelope was plain, but there was something about it that made her pause when she saw her name on the front. As she tore it open, she found a letter from her lawyer. It was brief, but it carried with it the weight of her past. "Samantha, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to inform you that the terms of your previous contract with Alexander Weston have been formally nullified. The agreement, as you know, was always intended to be temporary, but I wanted to make sure you received official confirmation. You are no longer bound by any of the provisions outlined in the document. You are free to move forward with your life." Samantha's heart raced as she read the words again, making sure she hadn't misinterpreted them. There was in black and white. She was free, truly free. The contract that had once held her in place, that had kept her tied to a man who had controlled her every move, was no longer valid. She wasn't sure if Alexander had initiated this or if it had been a legal formality, but either way, it didn't matter. The past was finally behind her. The realization hit her like a wave, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what it meant. She had done it. She had gotten out. She had rebuilt her life on her own terms. The freedom she had fought so hard for was now a reality, not just an idea or a dream. She could breathe again, without fear, without restrictions. Samantha folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly. A mixture of relief and pride filled her chest. She had taken control of her own destiny, and nothing, not Alexander, not the past, could take that from her. As she stood there in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the letter in her hand, she realized that she had not only escaped a gilded cage, but she had also found the courage to embrace the life she was meant to lead. She didn't need anything from anyone anymore. She had everything she needed right inside herself. The future was hers to create, and for the first time, Samantha was excited to see where it would take her.